Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Official 24 channel. I'm leaving. The words echoed in Kane's ears like a hammer striking steel, each syllable reverberating through the fragile walls of his heart as Lily stood before him, a whirlwind of tears, frustration, and determination, the very essence of the woman he had loved, cherished, and, in moments of weakness, underestimated, and he could feel the weight of the years pressing down on him, memories cascading in an uncontrollable flood from the first time he had held her hand at that fateful charity gala. The nights they had spent dreaming of a life together, the whispered promises in the dark when the world outside seemed too cruel, and yet here she was, standing firm with suitcase in hand, eyes glistening with the kind of clarity only comes when someone has made a decision that will alter the course of both their lives forever. And Kane, usually so composed, so masterful at reading the moods and intentions of those around him, found himself utterly helpless, words failing, throat tight, chest heavy with the realization that this time, no argument, no tearful plea, no desperate reasoning could anchor her, could tether her to Genoa City, to him, to the fragile family they had tried so hard to build. And as Lily's gaze shifted, a mixture of sorrow and resolve, Kane caught the glimmer of excitement, almost childlike, in her eyes, a spark that had been buried under years of struggle, betrayal, and heartache, a spark that told him that she was stepping into a new chapter, leaving behind the constant cycles of hurt and compromise. And in that moment, as the taxi pulled up outside the familiar brownstone that had been witness to their highs and lows, Kane's mind raced, images of all the little things that had once bound them together, the late-night coffees, the shared laughter over ridiculous misunderstandings, the moments of comfort during illness or grief, the stolen kisses that had made him feel alive and human. And now, all of it seemed poised on the brink of irretrievable loss. Yet there was a strange clarity in Lily's departure, a fierce statement that she was reclaiming herself, that no matter the heartbreak left in her wake, she was choosing herself over the suffocating weight of the past, over the manipulations, over the suffocating expectations of the people who thought they knew what was best for her. And as the driver opened the car door, Lily lifted her head, eyes glinting with a courage Kane had not seen in years, and he realized, in that gut-wrenching instant, that love alone was not enough to hold her, that sometimes even the deepest, most enduring affection could not counter the need for personal freedom, the pursuit of dreams, the assertion of independence. And as she stepped into the cab, Kane's voice cracked, a whisper barely audible, "Lily," but she only gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had shared, the bond that had shaped them both, but also a resolute farewell. And as the cab pulled away, taking with it the woman who had been his anchor and his chaos in equal measure, Kane sank onto the couch, heart pounding, mind racing, while in the next block over, Phyllis, who had been silently watching this entire emotional maelstrom from behind the safety of her carefully composed facade, felt a thrill of satisfaction that she had not dared allow herself to feel for months, perhaps years, a giddy, almost mischievous delight at the upheaval of Kane's world, at the sudden opening of a door she had long desired to see ajar. And as Lily disappeared from view, Phyllis could not help but smirk, the old thrill of victory mingling with a tantalizing sense of opportunity, because while Lily was gone, and while Kane sat alone in the echoing silence of his apartment, forced to confront the emptiness left in her absence, Phyllis felt the currents of fate shifting, like a storm rearranging the landscape, presenting possibilities that had previously seemed out of reach, possibilities that whispered her name, that dared her to step forward. And in the sprawling complexity of Genoa City, with its endless interwoven webs of ambition, desire, and betrayal, Lily's departure was not just a moment of personal liberation, but a catalyst for change, a spark that would ignite a chain reaction of emotion, strategy, and revelation, because everyone who mattered, everyone with stakes in the lives of these entwined souls, would feel the tremor of this single, decisive act. And as Kane sat there, grief and regret battling with respect for her choice, Phyllis's delight deepened, a dangerous, intoxicating joy that made her pulse quicken, and it was not merely schadenfreude, not merely the satisfaction of seeing someone else hurt, but the intoxicating thrill of opportunity, of the realization that life's relentless machinations often open doors precisely when one least expected them. And in the silence of his apartment, surrounded by photographs of happier times, mementos of love and laughter now tinged with melancholy, Kane understood that he could not stop her, could not bend fate to his will, and Lily, in her courage, her self-assertion, had claimed a victory over the chains of circumstance, over the lingering shadows of manipulation and heartbreak that had plagued her for far too long. And as the cab disappeared into the distance, as the city lights blurred past her determined figure, she felt the exhilarating mixture of fear and freedom, of leaving the familiar and embracing the unknown. And even as tears threatened to spill, even as a pang of guilt tugged at her heart for leaving Kane behind, she knew, with absolute certainty, that this was the path she had to take, the assertion of autonomy that every soul craves, the act of saying, "I matter," even if it hurt the one she loved most. And back in the apartment, Kane's hands trembled, touching the items that had been part of their shared life, feeling the weight of absence, of endings, of beginnings that he could not control. And in the quiet that followed, Phyllis leaned back, a triumphant smile curving her lips, savoring the moment when the world had shifted in her favor, when the dynamics she had longed to alter had, at last, begun to change. And as the night descended on Genoa City, with its streets whispering secrets and promises, its alleys and avenues holding the weight of countless stories of love, betrayal, and ambition, one truth became clear to everyone watching and everyone involved. Lily's departure was not merely a goodbye, it was a declaration, a seismic shift in the emotional landscape of the city, one that would ripple through every life she had touched, every heart she had held, and every scheme and desire that lurked in the shadows. For in soap opera terms, nothing ended quietly, nothing went unnoticed, and as Lily disappeared into the horizon, Kane remained in his apartment. Phyllis basked in her delight, and the world of Genoa City waited, tense and expectant, for the next twist, the next revelation, the next heartbreak that was certain to follow. Because in a city where love and rivalry collided in a constant, dizzying dance, one woman's bold decision to leave was enough to set off a chain reaction that would change everything, challenge everyone, and remind all who remained that life, in its chaotic, unpredictable beauty, never paused, never forgave, and never, ever allowed for anything to stay the same. And yet, even as Lily's taxi merged with the endless flow of traffic, carrying her away from the life she had known, the man she had loved, and the tangled emotional ecosystem of Genoa City, a storm of feelings brewed inside her, a volatile mixture of liberation, guilt, and exhilaration, for leaving Kane, leaving a man whose love had once been the steady anchor of her life, was no small feat. And every mile that separated her from his apartment brought flashes of memory, his gentle laughter in the kitchen as they argued playfully over breakfast, the weight of his hand in hers during times of crisis, the quiet moments in the garden where their conversations had flowed effortlessly like water over stone. And yet, juxtaposed against those tender recollections was the lingering ache of frustration, of compromise after compromise, of dreams deferred, of conversations left unfinished, promises made under duress, and expectations imposed by a city that thrived on scandal and ambition, a city where every choice was scrutinized, every desire weighed against legacy, family, and reputation. And she realized, as the cab sped through the city streets, that her decision to leave was not merely an act of rebellion, but a deeply considered assertion of self, a radical acknowledgement that her own happiness, her own identity, could not be sacrificed for the comfort of others, no matter how much she loved them. And in that understanding lay a profound mixture of fear and strength, a recognition that stepping into the unknown was terrifying, yet undeniably necessary. And while Kane sat in his apartment, the echo of the cab horn fading into the distance, his mind reeled with 1,000 thoughts, each more torturous than the last, and he could not stop seeing her face, the determination in her eyes, the subtle tremor in her jaw, the tightness of her shoulders, all of which told him, with agonizing clarity, that this was irrevocable, that no amount of pleading, reasoning, or desperate emotional display would change the course she had set for herself. And as he sank onto the couch, clutching at a throw pillow as if it could provide solace or anchor him to the life they had shared, the city outside seemed to mock him, the neon lights flickering like the faint, mocking smirk of fate itself, as if the universe took cruel delight in reminding him that control was an illusion, that love alone, even when deep and genuine, could not always hold the threads of life together. And somewhere in this emotional maelstrom, Phyllis felt the thrill of power in its purest form, a dangerous, intoxicating delight that coursed through her veins, making her pulse race as she imagined Kane's heartbreak, imagined the subtle shift in the balance of desire, influence, and opportunity that Lily's departure had created, and even as guilt flickered at the edges of her consciousness, reminding her of the shared history, of the time she had fought beside Kane, supported him, and even loved him in her own complicated way, she could not suppress the exhilaration, because soap operas, after all, thrived on upheaval, on the artful manipulation of timing and consequence, and in that sense, she had become both artist and audience, witnessing the masterpiece she had helped orchestrate, while feeling the rush of seeing her own desires reflected in the chaos of others. And as Lily's cab navigated the city outskirts, thoughts of freedom, of reinvention, of reclaiming the parts of herself that had been muted by circumstance, swirled in her mind, interspersed with pangs of sorrow, because love, even when it fails to tether someone, never truly leaves the heart, and she knew that a part of her would always ache for Kane, would always remember the warmth of his embrace, the quiet reassurance in his eyes, the way he had once made her feel seen, understood, cherished in a way that few ever had. And as she imagined the life she was stepping into, uncharted and filled with uncertainty, a mixture of fear and anticipation coiled in her stomach, a thrilling, nauseating reminder that she was alive, truly alive, in a way that remaining would never have allowed. And meanwhile, Kane, sitting amid the shadows of his apartment, allowed the memories to wash over him, painful and beautiful in equal measure, recalling nights when laughter had carried them through storms, mornings when small acts of tenderness had built a fortress of intimacy, arguments that had tested and, at times, strengthened their bond. And now, all of it seemed suspended in a delicate balance, a fragile construction that had been toppled by a single act of determination, a single declaration of independence. And as he tried to steady his breathing, trying to summon the clarity that had always served him well in business and in life, he realized, with a mixture of despair and admiration, that Lily had shown a courage he could not match, that leaving had been an act of power, of self-preservation, a bold step into autonomy, and in that recognition lay both pride and heartbreak, a duality that tore at him as he imagined the days ahead, quiet, empty, and full of what-ifs. The gnawing ache of absence compounded by the awareness that life would go on, that Genoa city, with all its relentless energy and unyielding drama, would continue spinning, indifferent to the private agony of its citizens. And then there was Phyllis, whose delight was only magnified as she considered the opportunities now within reach, opportunities that had been long delayed by Lily's presence, by Kane's devotion, by the intricate balance of relationships that had governed the past few years. And as she leaned back, savoring the rush of advantage, the possibilities that stretched before her like the open horizon, she allowed herself a brief, almost sinful smile, because in this city, as she knew so well, advantage was fleeting, power was ephemeral, and timing was everything, and Lily's departure had, in a single dramatic moment, tilted the scales in her favor, created an opening in a narrative she had longed to influence. A crack in the armor of stability that had shielded Kane and Lily from the chaos she could now exploit, and yet, in the midst of all this strategic delight, the echoes of humanity lingered, for even Phyllis, hardened by years of ambition and self-interest, could not entirely deny the bittersweet undertones of the situation, the reminder that people's hearts, fragile and unpredictable, were often the most volatile elements of all, and as she imagined Kane alone in his apartment, images of vulnerability flickering across his features, she acknowledged, however quietly, that the emotional stakes were higher than any business maneuver, any scheming victory, and as night deepened over Genoa City, as the streets hummed with the low, constant murmur of life moving inexorably forward, the three players in this drama, Lily, Kane, and Phyllis, were each caught in their own spirals of thought, desire, and calculation, each confronting the consequences of choices, the fragility of attachment, and the relentless forward motion of life, and somewhere between the taxi speeding toward unknown horizons, the apartment heavy with memory and longing, and the quiet thrill of a manipulator savoring opportunity, the city itself seemed to pause, if only for a heartbeat, as though acknowledging the profound weight of personal agency, of decisions made and lives altered, and as Lily glanced out of the cab window, the reflection of city lights mingling with the glimmer of tears in her eyes, she thought of the people she left behind, of Kane's unwavering love, of the subtle triumph gleaming in Phyllis's eyes. And she understood, with a clarity that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that the act of leaving was a kind of rebirth, that the life she had known could never fully contain her, and that the narrative of Genoa City, rich with secrets, desires, and endless schemes, would continue to unfold around her, around Kane, and around those like Phyllis, who thrived in the liminal spaces of chaos and opportunity, and in this dizzying, emotionally charged, endlessly dramatic web, each step, each glance, each whispered thought mattered, reverberated, and shaped the countless interwoven destinies of the city, because in Genoa City, love and betrayal were inextricably linked, power and desire danced a constant tango, and one woman's decision to walk away could set in motion a chain of events that would ripple across every heart, every ambition, every carefully guarded secret, and as Lily's cab disappeared into the night, carrying with it the fierce, resolute pulse of her newfound independence, Kane remained in the quiet of his apartment, holding onto memories like fragile talismans, wrestling with grief and respect, and Phyllis, in her self-satisfied triumph, plotted the possibilities, feeling the thrill of a narrative suddenly shifting in her favor. And so the city breathed, held its secrets, and waited, for in Genoa City, nothing truly ended, nothing was ever simple, and every choice, every act of courage, every departure, left a mark that could never be erased, a mark that would shape the destiny of those involved, and the drama, as always, was far from over. And as the taxi carried Lily farther from the city she had called home, from the man who had once been the center of her universe, and from the tangled web of relationships, obligations, and unspoken expectations that had bound her, she felt the strange exhilaration of invisibility, of being untethered, of moving through a world that was suddenly hers to navigate on her own terms. And every reflection in the passing windows seemed to whisper both caution and encouragement, reminding her of the fragility of human connections, yet also of the power inherent in asserting one's own path. While back in the apartment, Kane's fingers traced the worn edges of photographs that held moments frozen in time, a lifetime of intimacy compressed into tangible images, and he felt the sting of absence sharpen as he realized that the spaces she had occupied, chairs, countertops, even the air itself, now carried only echoes, reminders of a life he had thought permanent. And Phyllis, ever the strategist, smiled to herself as she considered the chain of possibilities unfurling before her, imagining the subtle shifts in alliances, the way Kane's vulnerability could be exploited, the way doors that had been closed might now swing open, while yet, underneath her satisfaction, lingered the acknowledgement that even in triumph, human emotions were complex, unpredictable, and at times inconveniently real. And as the night deepened and Lily's taxi merged with the long stretches of highway leading to new beginnings, she allowed herself to imagine a life unbound, a life where her desires were her own, where choices did not have to be negotiated, where the constant tug-of-war between love, loyalty, and obligation could be replaced by clarity and self-determination. Yet even in these visions, she felt the tug of the past, the knowledge that leaving Kane, leaving their shared history, was not merely an act of physical departure, but of emotional revolution, a confrontation with the parts of herself that had been silent for too long, and